Have you ever wandered into a bookstore and bought a book only to find it cheaper online? Why does this happen? The reason has to do with parallel importation restrictions. To understand that, let's quickly unpack parallel importation. Parallel importation occurs when a good that's protected by intellectual property rights is legally imported into Australia. Following an amendment to the Copyright Act, Australia imposed restrictions on the parallel importation of books. PIRs prevent Australian booksellers importing protected books, and instead they must purchase the stock from a local publisher who holds Australian rights. In 2009, the Productivity Commission reviewed the PIRs and recommended their removal, sparking agreement from some and backlash from others. First, let's explore the arguments against PIRs. One of the biggest opposing arguments is that PIRs increase the price of books. When a book has PIR protection, booksellers are required to source their stock from the Australian publisher, regardless of the price of any foreign editions. Often this means that local retailers are forced to pay more for their stock, making book prices rise. The Productivity Commission believes that the removal of PIRs would increase the availability of cheaper supply options and reduce cost pressures on local retailers, ensure consumers have access to price-friendly books, and restore local booksellers' competitive edge against online outlets. There's also an argument that PIRs promote anti-competitive behaviour. The Productivity Commission argues that PIRs increase the scope of a publisher's market power, allowing them to exclusively control the distribution of a book, which ultimately leads to price discrimination and manipulative terms of supply. Now let's look at the arguments for PIRs. Firstly, the Australian publishing industry is heavily reliant on the benefits of PIRs. By lessening import competition, PIRs provide certainty for local publishers that they won't be undercut by overseas alternatives. If PIRs were removed, the Australian Publishers Association fears that an avalanche of cheap imports would flood the market, which would decrease industry revenue, threaten 20,000 jobs in the publishing sector, and smother small Australian publishers who would be unable to compete with decreasing sales, rising costs, and growing global competition. The Australian Authors Association also argues that PIRs significantly support Australia's literary culture. We said before that the price of books in Australia is more expensive, so where is the extra money going? Currently, the Australian publishing industry reinvests $120 million annually into the creation, publication, and promotion of Australian books. So yes, our books might be a bit more expensive, but by protecting the current pricing structure, PIRs allow publishers to invest in the voices and originality of Australian authors, which could otherwise be overlooked by overseas publishers. This side of the argument is best summed up by the Australian Society of Authors, who say that the recommendations to remove PIRs reflect a crippling erosion of the copyright position of creators and would result in the decimation of the Australian publishing industry. These recommendations were first made in 2009, and since then there have been only microscopic movements towards its implementation. In 2015, the Turnbull government pledged to remove PIRs, but with impassioned arguments on both sides, this debate is far from settled.